10, 9, 8,
7, 6, 5.
Gerald DJ, cooperate.
Tuned into the motherfucking tracks, man. We taking over, 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 we taking over.
Hey everyone, I'm Darian Simone Harvin. Thank you for locking into the 9th installation of Am I Allowed to Like Anything? This episode is with Gerald, who is the co-founder and CEO of MBAs Across America. It's an organization that gets MBA candidates out of the classroom and working with entrepreneurs in cities and towns across the country. But you know what you'll quickly come to discover is that Casey himself is so much more than just his title. And that's really why I knew I needed to have him on my podcast. And I think that through our discussion on leadership and scaling impact as opposed to scaling organizations, and also some Kanye West nostalgia, you're quickly going to figure that out. So, subscribe to Am I Allowed to Like Anything on iTunes. Leave your comments if you feel so moved to do so, and enjoy. So, Casey, tell me what time, I'm actually very curious to know this. What time do you wake up in the morning?
As late as possible. I hate the morning, To be honest, I try to force myself up to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Do you? Does it typically happen?
It very rarely happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I always read these reports, these articles about all the legendary people in history, and they're up at 4:30 in the morning. And I said, well, I'm just going to be really regular there because I can't do it.
I guess I'm not going to be one of those people.
I'm going to try. I'm going to try to do it my own way. But on a good day, I'm up at 7. But I'm never one to try to rush sleep to be done.
I agree. So, there are a bunch of things that we could talk about, and I'm glad that you're here with me because you really speak across the country, and you're known for a great speech that you've done for your graduation from Harvard Business School. But I wanted to kind of focus on a story and how I really found out about who you were. And, I love Fast Company magazine, and I have a subscription, and I actually gift them to my friends because I am like a cult follower of this magazine. And so when I received my issue and you were the face on, and I was like, who is this? I was like, who is this black man? I don't know who this is. I was like, oh my goodness. And so, I'm reading the article, and then I find out that you and Sarita Gates know each other, and I say I have to meet with him. So I'm curious to know, how did you, they're like not really about how did you land on the cover, but how did you get to a point where it was like, Fast Company goes to you, Casey, we want to do this with you because you've done this X, Y, and Z.
Well, first, it's probably a very short bench for people to put on the cover of magazines, perhaps, so maybe I was called up from the reserves a bit early. It really ties into the speech that I gave to my graduating class, commencement at Harvard Business School back in May of 2014. And I put all of this in the context of how this speech came about and how it, since I gave it, has sort of marked a demarcation in my life, in my private life and public life. I as any good Southern Baptist, I've been speaking for a long time. You could probably wake me up in the middle of the night, and before I finish drooling, I could give you a speech. So it's less of the technical thing. I had very little to say when they asked me to do this speech, and I was worried that I had writer's block, and so I holed myself up in a room and was going through this framework called the public narrative. Marshall Gantz, who's a professor at the Kennedy School at Harvard, has this deal called the public narrative that basically says we all have a story of self, a story of us, and a story of now. And it sounded kind of new agey, but I was desperate, So
yeah, you were into it. You were into it for the moment.
I was totally into it.
Yeah.
So I said, let me sit down and do my story of self. And it says, write down the 2 or 3 experiences that shape who you are and the work that you do. And I was like, this is really hokey, you know.
Yeah, like
but
this
I'm
is
gonna
annoying,
try
but
it.
I'm gonna try it.
So I'm sitting there in the cafe in Harvard Square. This would have been March of 2014, and I'm writing. The first thing that comes to mind is the experience of being held at gunpoint that I ended up talking about in the speech.
Right.
And I really hadn't spoken about this with anybody.
Wow.
I mean, a few folks in my family, a few
Right.
friends knew, but I hadn't spoken about it publicly.
It must be tough to talk about it too. I mean, even when you describe it in the video, it's like, I mean, you really do bring it alive, and I believe that you kind of, in a way, bring us to how you felt when you were in your apartment.
Well, you see, this is what this worksheet of the story of self pushed you to do. I had no interest in doing that.
Uh-huh.
And I started to write out these things, how I felt. And next thing I know, I'm weeping in the middle of this cafe. And it's very embarrassing to be a grown man crying in the middle of the cafe. So I said, well, what the hell is going on? But I knew that there was something in this experience that I needed to figure out for myself. So this speech really was more of a catharsis than it was a performance, if this makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I worked enough to not cry and give it at the same time, you know, and I thought I was ready to go. And the morning of the speech was the coldest day in May in the history of Boston. It was raining. I had gotten maybe 2 or 3 hours of sleep the night before. My last run through had been a complete disaster, and I had decided not to use any notes because, you know, it just seems like a third person in the relationship. You know?
Right.
And so I'm freaking out, and I go and lock myself in this conference room to try to compose myself, and it's not really working. And then about 8:30 that morning, my godmother called and told me Maya Angelou had died.
Wow.
And Maya was sort of my patron saint, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in ways. And I just thought this was a terrible omen that she died the day I was giving the speech. I was like, dang, Maya knew how bad this was going to be. She didn't want to be around, you know.
Oh, my God.
So I'm going into tailspin, you know, and I'm crying. I'm just like, what a ridiculous mess. And I didn't know what else to do. So about 9 o'clock, I called my grandmother down in Texas. She was 82 at the time. And I said, Granny, I don't have a good feeling about this. Would you pray for me real quick? You know? And my grandmother's a bit of a prayer fascist. I mean, if you drop this mic, she would pray over it for a couple of days.
Right.
She's into it. So I knew she was going to pray.
Drop of a dime, she was going to
pray.
Mm-hmm.
But she prayed this prayer that totally changed my life. She said, God, will you help Casey remove self? So that whatever it is you have to say to people, they can receive it. Because there are a lot of cultures, but there's only one mankind, and all of them can hear you if he gets out of the way. And it was a bit like stepping into the Matrix, you know. I had never really understood what it meant to be a vessel. I had never really realized how much in the way I had been, how much my ego had driven so much that I had done. And I think everything that happened after that speech, including this Fast Company cover, which I had no idea was going to happen. I just wound up talking to the editor-in-chief on the phone one day for an hour and a half. We had a great chat. That was it.
Right. He was like, I want you on the cover.
Well, it wasn't even that. The next thing, he calls and says, well, can you come and take a picture? I'm like, sure. I thought it was going to be a little thumbnail sketch or something, you know, on page 65.
Right.
So I was like, fine. He says 2 months later, will you come in and have a little chat? I'm like, sure. These little chats have been totally fine.
Yeah.
You know, I get there. He says, well, we decided to put you on the cover. So I
little chat here, little chat there, cover.
Next thing you know, you're on the cover of a magazine. So I think I put all of this stuff in the context of getting out of the way and getting my ego out of the way and trying to be used in some way that's not about me per se. Somehow it's been the best thing ever happened in my career. So.
No, and honestly, now that you tell that story, you can connect the dots in your video, I feel. Because even much of your startup now and really the mission of bringing people to the forefront and bringing helping others to the forefront is very much selfless, or at least it seems like that to me. And even going to business school, what do people go to business school for? And kind of also
to get rich, obviously.
Right. to get rich or to work on, I don't know, I went to school for journalism, right? So it's like when I hear people want to go to business school, they could go for a million different things. But you also kind of talk about, kind of the doctrine of business school, flipping it on its head a little bit and thinking of how do we change the world through business?
Well, I don't care about business. I care about people, And I only wound up at business school in many ways because, I was 12, and I went home from school one day, and my granny sat me down, and she told me that my mother, my mother suffered from mental illness. She was bipolar. Is bipolar. And she really was my best friend growing up. And she had been in a rehab facility, a mental rehab facility, and been discharged, but she didn't come home.
Right.
And that day turned into a month, a year, almost a decade. When I was growing up, I didn't know my mother was alive or dead. And in a lot of ways, she was my dream defender, I always say. I'd sit on the floor of the restroom when she was putting on her makeup, and I'd tell her about my plans for my life. And I'd say, Mama, I want to be a firefighter. And she'd say, yeah, baby, you can do that.
Right.
And I'd come back sometime later and say, Mama, I want to be a chef, like Julia Childs. And she'd say, oh, yeah, baby, you can do that too. And one day I went and said, Mama, I want to be Martin Luther King. I'd gotten very bold. And she said, well, baby, that's not a job. That's
a person. That's
exactly.
A mission. That's
But I'm sure you could do it. So anyway, when she left, she really, in many ways, took my dreams with her. And it was a very crushing thing for me. And just before I really gave up, people stepped in, often total strangers stepped in, and they raised their hand, they rolled up their sleeves, and they said, hey, kid, how can we help? And that really is the only thing that kept me alive in this question of what am I supposed to do with that now? And the only reason I got to places like Yale or Harvard Business School or sitting here talking to you is because of this divine conspiracy. And you go out and you see communities like the one I grew up in this country, and kids like the one that I was. And I don't think it ought to take a divine conspiracy for them to have a shot. So I'm only interested in business to the extent that it can be used for people. People should not be used for business.
As a medium.
Exactly. And we happen to be in a time where business is most likely the most important institution in society. It is to this age what the church was to the Middle Ages. And I think much like the Middle Ages, business is deeply in need of a reformation. And hopefully if I can play some small role in getting my sector to awaken and repent in some ways, then it'll all be worth it.
Yeah. I went to a really great panel a few weeks ago, and it was actually in the financial district. And the reason why it was so awesome was because it was an invite-only panel, and they were great people. They're most of them were part of the music industry, and it was a really small group. But the great thing was you could kind of talk back and forth a little bit, so it was like an exchange. And I feel like you're kind of touching on one of the points where we were all like, this spectacular guy. He had spoken all around the world. He had been in the rooms with Barack Obama with all of these great people. Was just really successful in his career, and he couldn't give us a specific reason why. Like, he couldn't say, well, it was because of this, or he said, it was my work that carried me. And for you, it was very much of this divine conspiracy that's carried you along with your hard work. So kind of getting into like what I really feel like people want to know, like as you said, a lot of kids, especially my age, in all of us growing up, we don't all have the same resources or the privileges. So it's like, well, how do you get to that place of where your work speaks for you, your character speaks for you, and maybe for you, kind of tying in using business as a medium, what are some maybe your own principles that you go by? They could be mantras, they could maybe be like the nuts and bolts of what you've really, some principles that you've created for yourself.
Well, there are a couple things in that. First is, how do you get to principles in the first place that are good for you, that work for you? And I was telling a friend of mine the other day, the big challenge for any of us is to live an original life in a world that is hostile to the idea of original lives.
Yes.
I mean, we have to be willing in some ways to be an outcast.
Right, somewhat of a rebel.
To be considered insane. I boycotted nap time in kindergarten. I've been an insane person for a very long time. I threatened to kill myself at 8 with a Sega Genesis cord because I felt that I was not being treated justly.
The drama. Oh my God, that's some drama.
Right. So in a lot of ways, what I am really interested in, if I'm talking about how do we help more people make it, who are kids like me, it's not about, well, how do we teach them how to wear their pants right and speak a certain way and go to certain schools. It's more, how do we teach them how to be free, how to think for themselves,
right,
how to ask the impertinent questions, right? That's the first and foremost thing. And then once they go on a journey of a lot of suffering, then they might find some principles,
right.
And I think 3 principles that I really do live by, have come to live by. The first is that leadership is about liberation. A lot of folks think that leadership is about how many people can I get to listen to me. And a great text by Stephen Greenleaf called Servant as Leader. Really, I think is a great handbook on this. Leadership ought to be about making folks around you bigger, better, stronger, more actualized, more capable of living their true purpose in the world. So I coach a lot of people to leave my organization. Okay? I coach a lot of people to quit. I coach a lot of people to have a side project.
Yeah, I coach a lot of people to quit too. I coach a lot of my friends to quit. I'm like, you don't like your job? Let's work towards something else.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I'm saying quit working for me.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
You're like
I love them.
Right.
But I only hire them if there's something deeper in them that this can be a way station for. And I think if leadership is about liberating people to be their best selves, do their best work, then it's less about command and control and am I right and am I in charge and how many people on my payroll. I'd love to have nobody on the payroll. It's less money I have to raise.
Right.
But more fundamentally, leadership has to be about liberation, and that requires getting the ego out of the way and all these other things that I often talk about. So I think that's the first principle. The second principle that somewhat flows from that is that what we ought to be doing is scaling impact, not organizations.
I know everyone always talks about how can we scale?
Exactly.
How can we scale? But really we should be scaling impact.
Exactly. I think the scale thing, one, is just somewhat clinical. It's like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like, how can we scale? I hear people in my head, how can we scale? How can we
Right.
scale?
So that's the first, but also we have to understand that actually some of the scale stuff runs contrary to creating extraordinary stuff, You can't scale the Mona Lisa. It's an extraordinary piece of work. You can't scale The Fire Next Time. That's not a 1,500-page book, right?
Right.
It packs its punch in its sensibility of smallness, of a small scale. Sometimes you can't scale love. Anyway, how do we scale impact? My organization, we're about to put it out of business. We are literally going to, hopefully in the next year, shut our doors and liberate the work to say that it doesn't take one centralized organization to get people to use their time and talent and skills to help other folks.
Wow.
Everybody should be doing it.
Yeah.
Somebody just offered us a $400,000 grant.
And you were like,
And
no.
we're going to turn it down. And I don't want to be dramatic or self-righteous about it, but I think it's really due time for us to stop praising the singular entrepreneur or the singular organization when this moment is so urgent that all of us have a role to play in solving the big challenges. So I think it has to be about scale and impact, not about scaling organizations, because the challenges are too big.
Yeah, so let me ask you this question. Do you feel like the focus should be more on lifestyle? Or I guess if it's not, I wanna kind of push to see what, if not this, then what? Or how people play the game, if not this, then that, or not, whatever it's called. But if not organizations or maybe this physical room that we're in to get work done, then what does it look like for you?
Well, the focus, I don't know if it's focusing on lifestyle per se. The focus has to be on the work. I always use the example of Jesus. Jesus, now, It sounds terrible.
No.
Right? Jesus never started a church.
Right.
Think about that. He literally never started a church. And the
never
person
settled.
that he asked to start a church, Peter, was the person that denied him 3 times just a couple of days before. I mean, it's really unbelievable if you think about the story. Because now, 2,000 some odd years later, people have come to somehow believe that you can only understand Jesus by going to a church. I mean, it's really bizarre in some ways.
Yeah.
So what it means for me is really getting to what is the work? And if the work is going and finding people like Sebastian Jackson, the barber in Detroit, who's trying to play a role in bringing his city back from the brink, if the work is going to find him and finding some way to put the wind at his back and support his dream, that's not an organizational challenge per se.
Right.
That ought to be the challenge of every single human being walking on the face of the earth.
Yeah.
And I think changing, this goes right back to liberation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Liberation is an understanding of the truth. So powerful, there's no turning back from it. And the truth is that there is no single savior that's going to come and fix all our problems. So that's what it means for me when I say scale impact, not scale organizations. Scaling impact goes right into the heart of an individual and shows them how they can play a role without anybody giving them permission.
Right. It seems like you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you are very interested in giving or providing people with the tools or the knowledge to help them with their own influence.
You know, people always say, well, Casey, you know, people have to pick themselves up by their bootstraps. You know, and it's the most asinine thing that I hear. Because a lot of people don't have any boots.
Or straps.
Or straps, you know what I mean? So, yeah, there are extraordinary people trying to do extraordinary things. And we have the resources to help them. And I might be one of the few people who, you know, happen to be caught between these two worlds. You know, I spend a lot of time, you know, going around talking to folks who have billions of dollars and all these resources and all this authority and credibility. And I spend a lot of time going to places like Pikeville, Kentucky, in Appalachia, where 1,000 people have lost their jobs in the past year in the coal mines. I mean, those two worlds shouldn't exist in the richest country in the history of human civilization. And I think if we find a way to realize how abundant our reality is and put that abundance to use in a way that is not destructive to our souls, but actually unleashes the potential of people. It's a relatively simple idea, I think. It might require some radical rejiggering of our consciousness, but I think we can do it.
Yeah. You're somebody who I would consider a visionary, right? Like, you are able to really speak and to kind of pass along. You're very good at helping others to envision your goals and then hopefully their goals too. And I want to talk about South by Southwest because you're going to be one of the keynote speakers there. And you do quite a lot of speaking, and I want to know for you kind of the act of that. My first question is, why do you like it? Why do you like speaking? Why do you like being a speaker?
Yeah, I've been doing it 20-some odd years. I'm just 28. I've been doing it 20-some odd years, you know, and I don't think anybody's ever asked me the question. I think, one, you like to do things because you're good at them.
Right.
I mean,
yeah. I was like, I have a knack for this.
I mean, I've spent a lot of time doing this. And I really, and this is just from a craft standpoint, I mean, the work that it takes to put a sentence together and to get a point across in a way that is actually somewhat poetic or somewhat beautiful or somewhat funny, but a very serious point that might strike to the very core of somebody's soul, I think it's a huge challenge. It's a great challenge. And every time, for example, with the South by Southwest thing, I thank God I have so much time to prepare because I haven't the slightest clue what I'm going to say.
Right.
I have no idea. And so this dramatic tension. You know, I played football in college, and I just love to, you know, the adrenaline of each play. You know, is this guy gonna kick my ass? You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
You know, I love the challenge of trying to figure out when will the message come? And when it comes, how will I somehow take it from just a little spark of an idea to words that can move people.
Right, to something huge.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun. And then you go through and try to commit it to memory so that it gets out of the realm of performing something, where you can kind of fuse yourself with the words you're trying to say. Because the most important thing in this is connecting with people.
Mm-hmm.
And the best feeling, I think, is to stand in front of an audience and look out and know that you have you've almost like, think about those space movies, and when the little spaceship docks with the big
right.
spaceship, sometimes you have this moment where you sync spiritually with people in an audience, and you know that you have changed their lives. And so I like doing it because it's a hell of a challenge, and it requires me to dig beyond myself to try to connect with some message that isn't about me, and that requires a lot of just sort of weird mystic work, but then I just love being able to connect with people, and to the extent that we can use whatever we're good at to help somebody or change somebody's life or move the universe in some way forward, I think it's a great privilege.
Right. Okay, let's switch gears here a little bit. What type of music are you listening to right now?
Oh man. My grandfather was a pastor, mm-hmm. and my other grandfather ran a blues club.
Wow, that's like the secular and the holy.
Exactly, like sacred and profane. Recently I've been listening to a lot of the stuff that I listened to when I was 15, 16, 17. I've been listening to Kanye's first album.
Oh my gosh.
I've been listening to the Black Album. I've been listening to Lauryn Hill's Unplugged. I've been listening to Bilal's first album,
To whose?
Bilal.
Okay.
I was like, come on. I was like, oh man.
Oh my God, don't act like you don't know him.
I know.
Darian.
There's some about those early albums that you listen to, especially people like Kanye, especially people like Jay-Z, not the new stuff, but like the old stuff, because you remember where you've come from, and I've been working on this book proposal that's sort of a memoir, and I really struggled early on to reconnect with 15 or 16-year-old Casey, so I end up having a need, I need School Spirit, which is one of my favorite songs on Kanye's College Dropout album. Like, I need that song to help me find myself again.
Right, to kind of envision what you looked like, how you remember how you felt when you listened to that song
exactly.
10 years ago, 12 years ago.
Because it was speaking to me in a different place, you know what I mean? My first song, Jay-Z, right? Speaking to me it was speaking to me in this place of hunger. I desperately wanted to imagine some different place for myself. So anyway, I've been listening a lot of that recently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you a foodie or are you pretty? I feel like you have to be. You're from Dallas.
No, I'm not a foodie at all, to be honest with you. Partially because I can't cook worth a damn. And it's so expensive to eat in New York City.
It is.
And the great thing about growing up poor is that it really doesn't take a lot of food to be satisfied.
Right.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, I eat not to be hungry. I don't eat for like some, fancy exercise.
Right.
So no, I'm not a foodie, unfortunately. I eat wherever somebody invites me to eat.
Yeah.
For free.
Okay, wait. So do you have, this might help some people out there. This will definitely help me. Do you have a food hack or something you really like to eat?
Ooh. This sounds so sad. This is like 20 years from now. I hope this doesn't exist. But a big bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios for breakfast actually makes you a lot less hungry during the day.
Really?
That and then green tea. Green tea is fantastic, especially for those of us who have yet to use our gym memberships. Green tea is unbelievable.
Yes.
One is good for you, antioxidants such and such, but also...
I feel like you should try a matcha tea. Have you ever tried the matcha?
No, but I've had the ice cream. Which is great.
Well, no, it's great, but there are these, there are like these matcha cafes that are popping up.
Really?
So if you ever come across one, yeah, it's delicious.
Oh, that's dope. That's dope.
Okay, so we have this segment, this is always my favorite part. This is the +1 segment where you're able to really shout out some product or experience or person or thing that you are just loving, you can't get off your mind, you feel empowered by.
You go first.
Okay. So mine is actually the relaunch of Kith. Are you familiar with Kith and Running Fight? So I went to the relaunch of the store of the flagship store in Brooklyn near the Barclays Center, which was crazy. There's so many people there. I heard the firefighters showed up with I think it was maybe 2 trucks. Supposedly somebody got pissed off because they wouldn't let them in, so they called the fire department. I don't know if that's actually true, but that sounds like some crazy. That sounds like some hype beast behavior. Yeah. But anyways, so in addition to the store being remodeled, he also added a cereal bar.
Actual cereal.
Like an actual cereal. So there had to at least have been 20 to 25 cereals. It's not a sit down place, but it's you can go and you can get your cereal mixed, or it kind of comes in this little kit, almost like a kit set, right? So it's I love it because he really took a passion of his and created a space for it. And I'm sure, I know that there are other cereal bars that exist, but I love this one because it's just the product and the packaging is there. You can also get ice cream and make these blizzards and add all different types of cereals. So I just love it because I haven't gone back since, but wouldn't you love to be a kid who lived around Kith and in the morning before you went to school you picked up some cereal?
I'd love to do it.
Yeah.
At my age now.
Right. So I haven't gone back yet, but that's my +1 because I just thought it was awesome how he really kind of brought that to life and kind of saw a need for that.
Oh, I love that. No, seriously, I loved it. Well, anyway, we can talk about this offline. We should go. To the deal. We should have had this interview thing.
I know.
Been cool.
That would have been cool. Right. Oh, we should have asked them. Oh, man. Okay.
What is my +1? It's changed in the past 30 minutes. 2 weeks ago, I caught up with a friend of mine, Kenji Summers, who's great, creative.
I know Kenji.
You should have him on the show.
Yeah, honestly, I should. Kenji's great.
Kenji's absolutely
always
best.
Moving, always doing, always making.
So Kenji and I can try to have a regular sort of spiritual sanity check-in.
Yeah.
Once a month, and for this catch-up, one of his boys, named Sycamore, was in town. Sycamore, I think, is from New York. Sycamore does A&R for Epic Records.
Yes.
And represents Travis Scott. And I went into this, catch up, planning to be there for 30 minutes. We wound up being there for 4 hours, talked about a whole host of things. But anyway, the +1 is for Sycamore's hat, which was a riff on
Free Bobby Shmurda.
No.
Oh my God, sorry. I need to stop interrupting
you. Which was a riff on Donald Trump's Make America Great Again
hat.
Oh my gosh. And the hat said, Make America Dope Again.
Yes.
And I just thought it was the most incredible thing for so many reasons. But I think the most important reason, which really touches on why this wound up being a 4-hour deal, is that I think it's such an extraordinary moment. Maybe this is a function of living in New York, but I think lots of places around the world. Such an extraordinary moment to be a young Black person with crazy ideas who has somehow made it out of whatever your particular circumstances of birth were to this sort of world of trying to put something into the universe that is new, that is of value, that taps into all of your creative possibilities. And it's an extraordinary moment for us, one, because obviously, to be a Black person in this country has always been a quite challenging thing. Mm-hmm. But I think it is without question, very challenging now, and we all must be engaged and we all must be vigilant. But on the other hand, we have the ability to connect to one another and support one another's highest creative aspirations in ways that might be totally counter to respectability, might be totally counter to, you know, what has been the norm or the standard. We can create our own standard, and we can push each other, much in the way that, you know, Lorraine Hansberry pushed Nina Simone to stop singing in jazz clubs and go make real music. You know, and that kind of solidarity, that kind of brother and sisterhood that we can have now to take a hat that Donald Trump is using to divide the country and make something that's really cool or really dope. And
right.
I think I want one of those hats.
I want one of those hats too.
I think America does need to be dope again.
You know, when he says that phrase and when I see that hat, I always think, let's make America great again. I always think, let's make America great.
Full stop.
That's it. But yeah, that's what I always think about. And I've always thought about those hats and doing something like, you know, having the hat and just crossing out the again and putting a period right next to the T in great. But that's always been my thing, yeah.
But you know, on this point, a friend of mine sent me an Esquire magazine from 1936.
You have great friends.
Don't I? From January 1936. And it had in it the first printing of Langston Hughes' poem, Let America Be America Again, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The America That Never Was. You know, I think it has always, in some ways, been the outcast of our society, the downtrodden of our society that has called us to the potential of the country. And I think in those ways, you know, Sycamore is very vital to your hope to make America great. And that hat was just amazing. So hopefully somebody gives me one for free. Otherwise we might have to pay for it because we like it that much. Exactly.
I haven't met Sycamore personally, but I work with him on a magazine called Hardcover, and he participated in this project that's going to be in it. So I'm really excited for that to come out, and that's how I'm familiar with him. So yes. Right. Casey, I wonder how long this is. I felt like this was a very productive, jam-packed podcast, so I appreciate it.
It was a lot of fun. I could talk forever, especially you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, well, let's sign off here. I appreciate it. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you.